Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm going to be talking about another episode from season 7. This is episode 3, The Moonshiner. If you're enjoying these, please do hit like and hit that subscribe button. The Moonshiner was written by Jeb Rosebrook and directed by Larry Dobkin. This episode revolves around our Walton relative Boon, who is sort of the last of the Waltons living up on the mountain. They no longer have their home, so where he's been living, I think he's just been kind of finding his way up there. But he has now made his way to court because he is been found guilty of illegal manufacture and sale of bootleg moonshine whiskey. Jason goes to the court hearing and wants to speak on behalf of Boon as his relative. He says that he will take custody of Boon. He will cover his fine of $100 and feels that what's happened to Boon's family being driven off of the mountain and his whole way of life having been changed, that this has really impacted him and is the result of that. And Boon should be with family, and Jason's willing to be responsible for him. So Boon is released into the custody of Jason. Boon complains about progress and how what's going on is not something he considers progress. Jason brings him home and says Boon's going to be staying there. The family doesn't seem all that pleased, particularly Grandma and Olivia, who know the kind of trouble that Boon has gotten into and the potential trouble that he might be bringing to the family. Daisy and her daughter Melissa are back in town. Daisy stops at Ike's to get gas, and Ike and Corabeth are there and note that she is back. At the mill, John puts Boon to work. He's not sure that he's going to be particularly helpful, but as long as he's there, he's going to be put to work. Daisy has come by the house to basically return John Boy's engagement ring that he gave her. And she said that she and John Boy have sort of gotten further and further apart, and she hasn't heard from him very much since he's been over in London. Olivia feels like, well, they don't really hear from him, and maybe it's just a matter of time and place, but Daisy feels it's time for her to move on. She's going to go back to New York, but she wanted to stop by and return the engagement ring and also ask Olivia's forgiveness for what happened and for hurting John Boy. Olivia says that she did hurt John Boy, but it's not really for Olivia to forgive her, and she's not going to judge her. We see Boon with the family, and it's pretty evident that he doesn't really fit in. He doesn't feel like he fits in. And it's just that sort of sad feeling of life has moved on and he is still not able to come up to the world and the changes in the world and just isn't comfortable there. Boon is staying in the shed that has been multi-purpose. Lots of people stay in that shed. And Jason comes by in the evening and brings a jug of the recipe. And he says it was one that Grandpa sort of hid away and that it was for special people. And that he feels it'll help Boon feel at home. Boon samples it, thinks it's wonderful. Most of the family really would like Daisy to stay around, at least for a while. And Mary Ellen basically says she knows a place, a house that's furnished and not being used and would be perfect, basically because Mary Ellen is staying back at the Walton house with John Curtis while Kurt is away. Their house is not being used, and so she offers that to Daisy and Melissa. As Grandma is in the garden watering and weeding, Boon comes by and talks to her and says that he understands that she must be missing Zeb and the absence of him, and that he feels the same way. And basically that we get a sense of what happens as you get older. And I feel that that's really what this episode's core story is about, is aging and progress and how difficult it can be for older people to feel useful and involved and understand the world as it moves forward, and you want to hold on to what's familiar to you and the way of life that you have always liked and enjoyed and felt comfortable with, and yet you're being pushed and prodded and nudged and forced into the ever-evolving world. Ike delivers groceries to the Baldwins, and they're basically hiding away because there's been some great tragedy and they feel they can't show their faces, but they don't say what the tragedy is. At the mill, Boon is missing. He hasn't shown up, and Jason goes out to try and find him, and Boon is up on the mountain, and Jason can tell that Boone's plan is to build a still up on Waltons Mountain, and Jason says that they can't do that, that it could get the whole family into trouble. And Boon sort of feels like, well, nobody has to know about it. Boon and Jason are going to go rabbit hunting. And as we see them walking along this path, they come down along a trail that is by the water. This water would be Franklin Canyon and that reservoir that was there that we frequently saw. And this is that same sort of path and water that we saw in the opening credits of the Andy Griffith Show and that we saw many times in Walton episodes. As they're walking, Boon shares with Jason about his youth and his life and how he met this beautiful woman, Rose, fell in love with her. They got married, they had a son, and he had a home up in this kind of a culvert holler. And that at one point there were these terrible floods, and it took out his home, and along with it, he lost his wife and his son. So we have this empathy for the solitary life that Boon has lived since that tragic incident. Mary Ellen shows Daisy her home, and Daisy thinks it's lovely and would be a great place to stay if she decides to stay. And they talk about the war. They talk about John Boy being over there in London and Kurt getting ready to go wherever they send him, and just the impact of that, and particularly about the women and the families that had to stay behind and wait. Elizabeth and Melissa have gone to visit Amy, and they're playing with her, and Amy is I think she's knitting or sewing or doing something like that, some crafty thing that Corabeth insists she needs to do like an hour of every day because it's part of becoming a young lady and the skills that a young lady should have, the refinement that Corabeth wants her to have. Melissa's just sitting watching her, and Amy's a little like, what are you doing? She says, well, I'm watching you grow. and Amy thinks that's ridiculous. You can't see someone growing. And Elizabeth, we have a callback to the homecoming in that just sweet scene between Elizabeth and Jim Bob, where they talk about not wanting to grow up because they want to stay little forever, and that if they feel themselves growing, they'll just squeeze it back in. So Elizabeth sort of smiles about that and how that was something that she thought was possible when she was little. Amy has gone to get a soda, and she is talking with Ike and Corabeth asks about Melissa, and she didn't realize that Daisy had been married before, that Daisy was a widow, and Elizabeth said, no, Melissa doesn't have a father, and Daisy was never married. Well, of course, Corabeth is shocked and appalled and doesn't want Melissa to be playing with Amy because she doesn't want her to be engaging with a love child. Elizabeth doesn't quite know what that means, but Corabeth has very strong feelings about it. Jason has taken Boon to meet the Baldwin sisters as he promised after Boon tasted and loved the recipe. Although they are distraught, Jason does convince them to let Boon and Jason in, and we discover that they have lost the recipe for the recipe. And then Boon is able to help them recreate what the recipe is by, taste and all of his years of experience making moonshine, bootleg whiskey. And so he kind of goes through the process, and they now have, and they're taking notes, so they now have rediscovered the recipe for the recipe. Boon says that helping the ladies has brought out the best in him, and Jason and Boon continue to sample the recipe, and that evening Jason brings Boon back to the house, and they are both quite drunk. Jon sends Jason into the house and has a chat with Boon about getting Jason drunk and basically, in a sense, the negative impact that he's having on the family, and kind of a little bit of a warning there about his welcome here in the house being contingent on his good behavior. Feeling the impact of that conversation and feeling unwelcome, Boon has walked off basically, and Jason goes looking for him and finds him walking down the road. Boon has shot a hole in a sign that says progress, and basically Jason's sort of fed up with him and Boone's attitude, and he lets him go. Olivia feels that Daisy needs to confront Corabeth, that no matter where she goes, there will always be a Corabeth, someone who is judging her and condemning her for what has happened in her past. And Melissa, Daisy wants to protect her child and feels like she doesn't want her to go through that. Olivia feels that the best thing to do is to confront it here and now. And so she takes Daisy to go confront Corabeth. And while they are there, Olivia basically just talks to Corabeth and challenges her. She said, you took in Amy and you love her and you've been a wonderful parent to her. And did it matter to you what her background was? That how could you judge this poor child who's had no part of being responsible for how she came about? And so Olivia basically demands that Corabeth answer that question. Would she have not taken Amy? Would she give her up now? What about that relationship? And so Corabeth finally sort of realizes that she loves Amy unconditionally and relents and welcomes Daisy to the community. And we basically get the sense that she will allow Amy to be in contact with Melissa, and that although Olivia says, yes, Daisy made a big mistake and one she has paid for 1,000 times over, but she realizes that one needs to move forward. Boon comes back one evening when Jon and Jason are on the porch and wants to talk with Jason, and he gives Jason the $100 that Jason had to put up for his fine. And we basically find out, Boon says that he pawned his shotgun, and he just asks Jason for his freedom. Jason has been responsible for him, and Boon doesn't want that. He wants to be able to be responsible for himself, and his plan is to just go back up onto the mountain and disappear, and that no one will ever find him. And all he asks of Jason is that Jason give him 24 hours of a head start before he calls the police basically, and says that Boon has run off. He said, which is the truth. So he feels that Jason won't suffer any consequences from that. So Jason agrees, and Boon does head off up onto the mountain where he plans to build another still and continue to do what he does, because that's his life. That's what he knows. That's what he wants. And that's how he wants to live out his days. Daisy comes back, and as Boon is getting ready to head off, and she goes over to him and she tells him he is a very special man. She has liked his story. She has connected with him on some level, and just wants to send him off knowing that she feels what a special person he is. And that means a lot to Boon to have that from Daisy. Daisy has basically decided that for now, she's going to stay on the mountain and live in Mary Ellen's house. The end narration basically says that Boon was killed crossing a street at some point, and he was carrying 2 jugs of moonshine. So you get the sense that he did finish out his days in the way he chose. In this episode, there were a number of recurring characters and guest stars. We had Joe Conley and Ronnie Claire Edwards once again as Ike and Corabeth. We had Helen Kleeb and Mary Jackson back as the Baldwin sisters. Morgan Woodward was back once more as Boone Walton. We had seen him earlier in the episode, The Conflict. Now, I was doing a little digging into Morgan's background and resume and discovered that he majored in music and drama and had aspirations to sing with the Metropolitan Opera. And then when he came to Hollywood, he hoped to do musicals. We did hear a little bit of their drunk singing, but it wasn't something that would really showcase the professionalism of his voice because it wasn't meant to. And then he was in The Life and Times of Wyatt Earp for 4 seasons, playing Hugh O'Brien's deputy. And then he was in Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman and our very own Ralph Waite. He was also in Battle Beyond the Stars with Richard Thomas, and had an opportunity to be in a movie called Fire Creek with Henry Fonda and Jimmy Stewart. He did 55 episodes of the series Dallas, which was produced by Lorimar, which was the company that produced the Waltons. And he did 19 guest star roles on Gunsmoke and 12 Wagon Train, which was more than any other actor. And turned out that his uncle, who was a doctor, delivered a baby that we came to know as Tex Ritter. Deirdre Lenin was back as Daisy, and she did 6 episodes as that character. So I know I loved having Deirdre around and wish that her character had stayed around longer. Brandy Tucker played Melissa, and this is a different actress than the baby or really young toddler that we saw in the original episode, The Revelation, when she was introduced to us. Rachel Longacre was back as Amy Godsey, and the judge was played by actor Ford Rainey, who at 90 played in The Crucible at the Theatricum Botanicum, which was Will Geer's theater that he created and built and still exists. And he also did 2 episodes of Little House on the Prairie. So lots of connections here with these actors who came and did an episode of our show. They had worked together before, they continued to work with each other, and they had all these sort of crossover situations. Thank you for joining me for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons about the episode The Moonshiner from season 7. I'll be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons and more Ask Judy. Thanks for watching.